Hey folks, we are live here. It's Tuesday, June 2nd at 5 p.m. And I'm going to be talking today about Venus retrograde and the most important things that you need to know for relationships, for getting along with others, both personally and collectively, because obviously as I record this, we're in the midst of a lot of intense social uprisings and interactions and things that are not so easy to just kind of walk away from or minimize. And now more than ever, it's important to understand this nature of Venus retrograde. As you see, we're also very close to a full moon in Scorpio. This is, as I record this, it's the 12th lunar day. And so these things are really important. And I am taking the opportunity as well to talk about these things in the context of teaching an upcoming course on relationships. And the course is actually called Relationships 80-20. And I'm going to be actually deploying a strategy called the 80-20 rule. There's a principle that's called the 80-20 rule, which actually means that 80% of the strength of anything that you do comes from 20% of the effort. So in anything that you do, the 80% of the benefit comes from only 20% of the information. So if you can really focus on the highest leverage, like 20% of actions or techniques, if it's astrology or whatever it is, you get about 80% of the result. Now, I'm teaching this course because, again, it says fast track to respect and happiness. Because even with my advanced astrology students who have studied the relationship astrology with me over the years, because I teach things in a very comprehensive way, I have this approach called 3D relationships, where you focus on the individual first and their capacities, and then the synastry, where you lay the two charts on, one next to the other. That's actually called synastry. And then we have what's called the Kuta scores as well, which has to do with the nakshatra matching. I teach a very comprehensive approach so that you really can understand these things. But even within that complexity, within each of those categories, there's about 20% of it that gives you the 80% of the result. So within evaluating each individual's chart and each individual person for their relationship potential, there's about 20% of that is the most important, the highest leverage. Again, there's other things that you look at as well, but it really boils down to about 20% of it to give you 80% of the results of what someone's capacity is. Because, for example, with you, as much as you might think you're just one, lucky break from meeting your soulmate and all your relationship problems are fixed, I know it's a great thing to think. It's really not true. Because the reason most of your relationships look kind of similar on some level is because of you, because you're the common denominator. What all of your partners have in common is you. And not just relationship partners, but with all of your interactions. Have you noticed how they all kind of center around similar themes? Well, that's the you part. So again, that's the first thing we need to understand in our interpersonal relationships is what is our capacity and our tendency? What are we bringing to it before we ever match up with anybody else? Again, 20% of that is the most important, that gives 80% of the result. Then we take ourself and we match that with another person, for example. You take that thing that you're bringing and making everybody have to deal with. You're like, here I am with all my stuff, now contend with it. But then you meet someone and some of them can contend with it much better. Others have a harder time. Plus, you're now also having to contend with them because they're also bringing their thing and you're having to contend with that. So what happens when we're bringing those two people together? That's called synastry. More than anything, that's the synastry, which actually shows the buttons that are getting pushed. That's when you lay one chart on top of the next. And again, it's quite complex. There's a lot of stuff to look at. But once again, 20% of it gives you 80% of the result. So to get to 80% truth about the buttons that are getting pushed, you really only need to focus and concentrate on about 20% of it. But do it correctly, go deeply into it, and really understand it. So again, this is the theme of the Relationships 80-20 weekend. Again, and I'm also going to show all of the other things as well, but I'm going to really concentrate on this 20% that gives 80% of the results. And then the last thing is the kuta matching. And again, the kuta matching, there's 10 kutas, there's all kinds of different ways to interpret them. But literally, again, about 20% of the kuta principles and literal, categories like the Rashi Kuta, the Bhava Kuta, the Nadi, all of that, 20% of that gives you 80% of the result. So if we can focus on that main 20%, it's going to yield 80% of the result. So again, this is what I'm going to be focusing on. So I'll put the link there again, and then I'll get into this. But for anyone who is interested in really understanding your relationships in greater depth, and you've been studying astrology with me or with others, again, I've also made the course very affordable. It's only $47 for the weekend course. Click the link and look it over. But again, this is a way to really take that time, especially like for my long-term students that have been with me for a while, or even ones that are just coming in. You're going to get, it's like sort of drinking from a fire hydrant. That's the way I explain it. It's going to be full on, and I just teach straight through a lot of content. You're going to really see the most important qualities of relationship astrology, and it's actually the relationship principles. Because when you're learning something like astrology, of course, there are not many things like it, but when you're learning this, you're not just, by the way, pardon me, I just got out of the shower, went and played some tennis, and I just got out of the shower. So, but when you're learning these astrology principles, or let's say these relationship astrology principles, and the methods and how to use them, you're really learning about the life itself. Like, it's not just, okay, if the moon is here and that's there, it means this. Well, you're learning, what is the moon in relationships? It's which part of us? What does Jupiter even mean in relationships? If Jupiter is doing this, what is Jupiter showing, not just in general, but in a relationship? Why is it important in a relationship? What is the Saturn part of you? The Saturn part of life. What is Saturn, activating? What is that divine force? Okay, it's this. Well, how does that benefit or detract in our relationships? Well, it's this way. So if you see that influence, it's this, it brings this in our partnerships. But again, the great thing also about studying is you not only see it in relationships or in the exact, class that we're going to be talking about, but you're going to just be learning the principles more, the astrological principles and the principles of life in general. Like, for example, with Saturn, it's that capacity to be still, peaceful, silent, introspective. It's that capacity to be able to stay, and abide in our own company without being triggered, without being, feeling like we need to cling to others and feeling like we need to be, sort of codependent, and all of those negative qualities that we might otherwise get stuck in. Saturn gives us that maturity. And again, how important is maturity to relationships? Again, we can't have a good relationship until we're a grown-up and we're reasonable and we're humble and all of that stuff, right? So again, we're going to learn all of these universal principles. What is the sun part of a relationship? Why is the sun important? Well, because the sun gives a healthy identity, a healthy sense of confidence. When it's not there, then we're always looking for something to make us feel empowered. We're always looking for power in the other person. Oh, you'll be my power, but that never works. again, a healthy confidence, a healthy sense of identity is necessary in a relationship, right? So again, this helps us learn about relationships. It helps us learn about the sun, just in general. And then we take and apply it in relationships in this multi-level way. It just enhances everything. Mercury, why is Mercury so important in relationships? Mercury is literally the communicator. Is communication important in relationships? Well, of course. But again, we can see what happens when it's not. What happens when you don't have good communication? Either that one of the people maybe has a difficulty in their communication, or just the two different styles don't work. Well, now we're learning about Mercury in general. We're learning about communication in general, and we're seeing how it plays out in an individual's chart and what happens when that comes together with another person. So there's so many layers and benefits to studying astrology, and particularly relationships are really fun to study. It's some of my favorite things to teach, and my students really like to learn it too, because we have a lot of fun with it. It's a really fun subject to study. So I'm going to talk about the most important factors today from each of these categories, just kind of an overview of what the principles and what the overview is going to be in that weekend course, but also just in general so that you understand. I'm doing some of it now, of course, of just talking about first is understanding each planet as a relationship indicator or a relationship karaka, and as a supporting factor. For example, I just talked about Saturn, right? We were like, Saturn's bad. Saturn's doing something. It's bad. It's not bad. And again, in the 80-20 weekend, what I'm going to be talking about is I'm going to show each planet and its strength and its difficulty. But one of the main things to understand is, again, the depth of each one of these planets and how when it influences something, the strength that it brings and the potential difficulty as well. But again, those planets, each planet, not just in its own sense, but as a relationship factor, needs to be really understood. And one other thing as it relates to the planets, something that I'm going to really drill down into as well, that's probably overlooked more than it needs to be, is the nodal axis, because lunar nodes are often something that whenever you see them, you have to, and you see especially the nodal axis by synastry, and you see that one person's nodes are on another person's planets. This is something you need to really pay attention to. You need to really know how to interpret. So the other thing that I'm really going to focus on the weekend is not just identifying things and giving you more things to identify. Oh, more details, more data. Yay, I'm really smart. No, that's just a bunch of data. I'm giving you the data now, right? I just said, when you see the nodes over someone's chart through synastry, pay a lot of attention. Okay, pay a lot of attention, but you need to interpret that. So I'm going to be focusing on the interpretations, how to explain it, and the remedies, how to help someone with it. That's going to be a big focus, is how to take these things and explain them. Because again, one of the biggest problems we have is that, especially with students, is you gather a lot of information and you don't know how to use any of it. You don't know how to explain any of it. It just becomes, it just becomes a lot of data. And so beyond just data toward explanation, that's going to be the most important part of it. Now, a few other things that are so important in relationships, and these are principles, and you have to look for these principles all the time. In that, one of the most important principles is the principle of masculine and feminine. It's something that is always going to be an issue. Underneath it all, it's probably, if you could take the 80-20 of the 80-20 and get the purest concept that you need to understand, the one most pure concept that you need to try to dial in, it's the masculine feminine flow more than anything else in a romantic relationship, which means that you need to look for that principle all the time. You're looking for that principle. You're looking to see that there is a harmonious masculine feminine flow between the couple, which means, again, stereotypically we look at a man and a woman in a heterosexual relationship, but the same principles apply in gay relationships as well, but they're just more fluid. There's going to be a masculine and a feminine exchange in everything. And so this principle was laid out in all of the ancient Indian teachings, all the Vedic texts, and that doesn't just mean the astrology texts, but in the texts like the Kama Sutra and all of the, which is the lovemaking manual of how to bring great, not just lovemaking, but love and romance, and how to turn that into a divine play between Shiva and Shakti, which led to things like the tantric, practices and things like that. These principles of masculine and feminine and the dance of masculine and feminine, the yin and the yang, is very developed and very evolved. And when we're looking at any relationship, it's literally a dance between masculine and feminine. And of course, usually because most couples are a man and a woman, you're always looking to see how much of the energy is flowing from the man to the woman, then reflected back to the man, and this yin yang is set up. And again, you see this reinforced not just in Indian astrology, but in Indian culture as well. But in the Indian astrology books, especially the ones that address relationships, and particularly the nakshatra-based Kuta matching from India, you'll see that there are literally certain Kutas. There's especially one called Sri Dirg, and it's described and outlined in all the ancient texts, which means the distance to the woman. And the distance to the woman is a way to measure whether or not the energy is starting with the man and then flowing to the woman. And again, you can see this reaffirmed and shown in nature, whereas the sun, which is the archetype of masculine, is at the center of everything. And the sun is radiating its energy out everywhere. The main partner of the sun is the moon. These are the two luminaries. The sun and the moon is literally man, woman, masculine, feminine. And you want to understand, this isn't just archetypes. This isn't just an archetype. It's literally the origin of the energy. The origin of masculine energy and power is the sun. In you, in everything. The sun is what gives the power for everything. It gives the power for life. That's the masculine. And the moon is the archetype and the power of the feminine to take the energy of the masculine, to take the energy of the sun and be creative with it and create a world. Again, this isn't just poetry. It's not just poetry. The sun has been sitting at the center of our solar system for 4.5 billion years, with all the other planets moving around it as well. But especially it's the moon going around the earth that took that creative power of the sun and used it to create life on earth. Our life on earth is a harmonic, rhythmic balance between the power of the sun, the creativity of the moon and the lunar cycles. And after 4 billion years, finally life started to grow. After 4 billion years of this happening. Again, this isn't poetry, it's science. There's no reason to even believe in it. There's not a scientist in the world that could dispute what I'm saying. Maybe they'll doubt that any of it has a metaphysical origin, but that's their hang-up. It obviously and literally does, but when you're doing astrology, of course, this is what you need to start with. This archetype of masculine and feminine interacting. And so the bottom line as it relates to relationships is that when there's, without a doubt, the most prevalent relationship problem is when the masculine feminine flow is out of whack. That's the biggest one. And usually when that is intact, people can get through almost anything. And they'll want to get through it because when they're having to deal with something, the man feels like he's actually a man and the woman feels like she's the woman. Because the other thing is that underneath it all, the main thing that a relationship is doing in the bigger picture, and I'm talking about romantic relationships, but it's, and you know, most specifically, but it's in all of our interactions, but the romantic relationship is much more concentrated, but it's really the area of life where we're trying to live most in accordance with our gender identity. Again, because when you think about it, you as a gendered being is very much, it's so built into your identity, it's almost second nature. You're a human being, like, you know, I'm a human being, but I'm a human male. I identify as a male human being just as much as I identify as a human being. It's almost like I can't separate the male from the human being. Every person I see, I don't see them as a man or, I mean, I don't see them as a human being or a dog. I see them as a man or a woman. The man and woman are built into the identity. There's no separation from it. Immediately when we see any creature, we see, oh, that's a dog, that's a cat. We don't even think if it's a male dog or a male cat. It's just a dog or a cat. We don't even think about the gender. Another human being, instantly, we don't think, is that a man or a woman? Huh. Instantly, we're man, woman. And it completely sets up the whole dynamic that we have with them. Gender is so built into everything that we experience with each other. It's indelible from the, you know, from our understanding. And by the way, I'm going to let this comment go and I'm going to explain it. Hi, there's been way too much masculine energy on steroids for way too long. So this is the typical kind of stuff, and it's fine. That's fine. You're talking about governments and all that. Right. Okay. But this is also the kind of stuff that does nothing but screw up a relationship. When I'm going to be talking also about how the masculine is not just a bunch of patriarchy, domination, warriors out to kill everybody. That's not what the masculine is. That's an abuse of masculinity. It's because we live in a culture that's out of balance now. The Indian culture was not. They were in balance. But there's also toxic femininity. I'm sorry to break it on the world, but it's true. There's definitely toxic masculinity. There's toxic feminine energy as well. Passive aggression, things, you know, always feeling like everything the man does, you did to me. And again, this is where women also have to develop a healthier sense of identity. Again, I was just talking earlier about the sun. For example, when you see a powerful sun for a woman, or the sun is prominent, you'll know that she'll have a healthy identity in the sense that she's not going to just blame the man for everything that ever happened, for example. And yes, that is also a toxic feminine characteristic. And women are now also waking up beyond the old paradigms of everything masculine is toxic and everything feminine is the goddess. We have to get beyond these stereotypes as well. Again, the best example is from the Indian culture, because they showed the dance of Shiva and Shakti as a harmonious dance. Of course, as I say, we're way out of balance now. It's horrible, and that's totally true, that there's too much patriarchy running the world. That's not men. That's not someone that you want to get into a relationship with. You're not in a relationship with someone so that you can blame them for the patriarchy. If you are, it's like, okay, sorry, I can't do it. So we have to evolve this as well. And we're stuck at this point right now. And I didn't plan to get off on this, but when I start seeing this, when I'm talking about masculine energy and feminine energy in a relationship, I'm talking about that elegant dance, not the abuse of it. We can always get into the abuse. And by the way, we're going to talk about how that works as well, how when one feels unempowered, they overcompensate and all that. That's all part of it. So, Darla, I appreciate that you said that, but I also just wanted to address that because it's something that we're just simply not looking at right now, and to the detriment of everyone's relationships. And, especially that whole, man bad, woman good, it doesn't help women either because they don't want to think that. And I know, I just want to be really honest about something. Look, it's not as if I'm the greatest example of how to have successful relationships, but I've probably done at least 100, if not more, relationship astrology readings in the last 15 years, like 100 per year. So if anything, I'm at least like a scientist. I've seen more people's relationships than almost anybody you'll meet. And that includes most relationship counselors, because I look at them, I don't counsel them 100 times. I look at it and I look at it here this one time, and then I do somebody else's. I'm just constantly looking at what makes these relationships work and what makes them not work. And again, it's not something where, women don't want to be feeling that way. They want their men to be powerful. They want to be powerful. We all want to be empowered, and we want relationships to empower us, right? And they're meant to be empowering. So again, one of the biggest principles that we always have to dial in, that I'm always looking at, is how is the masculine feminine energy flowing? How is it flowing? When it flows from the woman to the man, like when she's in the initiating role, for example, it's like the gears grind to a halt to some extent, because she feels like she wants to be receiving that power and then reflecting it back. Again, receiving it doesn't mean some victimizing. Again, we can't even use this language sometimes these days. It gets hard. It's like, well, you can't have him bossing her around. It's not that. It's wanting to be receptive and trusting the man enough to receive it, right? Because women are empowered through, or I should say feminine energy, whether it's in a man or a woman, is empowered to receive. It's the power to be receptive. It's the power to be receptive. Whether it's a man or a woman, by the way, it's still the power to be receptive. It's just that women bond more to the power to be receptive as a matter of identity. A man bonds more to his power to be assertive. But again, that's masculine energy for a man or a woman. Men can be assertive and women can be assertive, and we need to be. Men can be receptive and women can be receptive, and we need to be. But as a matter of identity, a woman is going to bond more to her capacity to be receptive as a matter of her identity, and a man is going to bond more to his capacity to be assertive as a matter of his identity. And we get in a relationship and we see, how well are we doing that? How well am I in the initiating role? How well am I empowered in my masculine energy in this relationship? The man would think. The woman will be thinking, how well am I bonding to my power to be receptive in this relationship? Am I receiving what feels good, or do I always have to do it all myself? Again, so overall, this is just an overall kind of way to look at it. And we're going to go deep into that. But this masculine and feminine is like the most important principle as a principle. And it's reaffirmed in all different places. And again, so in the 80-20 class, I'm going to be showing all the different ways that you can see this and drilling down in the most important ones. And as I said, the other one is understanding each one of the planets, how important they are as a factor that contributes to a certain kind of glue or a kind of separation. And then we have the different kinds of synastry when you lay one chart on top of another. Again, you have to look and see how the masculine feminine is flowing. But then there's also key planets that you need to really focus on, and not just key planets, but key sections of the chart. Mainly first house, moon, Venus, and any other kinds of difficult associations. You have to prioritize them. And often what happens is, because there can be a whole lot of different possibilities, the prioritizing of these things gets a little bit muddled. And so what I'm going to be doing is walking through how to prioritize when we're looking at a chart and we see quite a bit of synastry, because most of the time or I shouldn't say most, but often relationships that last a long time, there's quite a bit of synastry, which means there's a lot of buttons getting pushed. You get around the person, and what the synastry is the thing that you feel that's very actively, again, kind of pushing your buttons when you get around the person. So it's a very active, like, when I get around them, I feel this kind of thing, because that planet is the same place my planet is. It might be one person's Jupiter is on the other person's Venus. Okay, that's going to be a very active button that gets pushed. And that can be a lot of glue. But it can be a lot of glue that's negative kind of glue. It's also the kind of thing where, like, you just can't seem to get away because there's all this buttons getting pushed. It's very active, and it's like, oh, it's not necessarily positive juice. It can be negative juice. So again, evaluating what the most important ones are and how much juice is behind them is really going to be important. So I'm going to concentrate again on like the 20%, the most important ones to concentrate on that brings like 80% of the result. Like when you see these things, this is actually going to move the needle a lot more. And how to identify it in each chart, because it changes. The same is true with the kutas. Again, the kutas are the nakshatra matching, and the nakshatra matching is, again, a very specific Indian technique. And again, you see these principles, especially like a lot of the masculine feminine in their text. One is called Muhurta Chintamani, one's called Kali Prakashika. These are two of the nakshatra matching texts. And you see a lot of these principles in it. And those texts have a lot of Vedic concepts in them. For example, things like the Nadi Kuta, which has to do with the element. You also have the Bhava Kuta, which is the houses. You have what's called the Yoni, which is the sexual matching. You have what's called the Gana, which is the Deva, human or demonic temperament. You also have, other conditioning factors like obstruction, what's called Veda. You have Raju, which is rope. So there's quite a bit of, there's a lot in the nakshatra matching, both the kutas and the conditioning factors. But again, it can seem like a kind of maze. It's like, well, we also have an aggregate score. The kuta score is an aggregate, which it said that if you get more than 20, then it's, quote, good. These things that we have in astrology. That score, the score, yay. But, the score is really shown by 2 or 3 of the kutas. And again, one of the things to do, and one of the real highest leverage approaches, is to see why the score is the way it is, which one was missing, and focus on ones and notice how to prioritize those kutas that give the highest scores. And also, again, everything is going to be concentrated on interpretation, not just identifying something and judging it. Oh, it's good, it's bad, whatever, right? So again, as this Venus retrograde right now in the sky, of course, it's a really good time to be studying these things and to be thinking about these things. Look at all of the social tragedies and unrest that we have right now, with just not feeling respected, not feeling appreciated. And even things like the masculine feminine, like we're talking about. Again, these principles are universal. We do have an excess, especially the world is being run in an excessively masculine way. There are a lot of reasons for that. Of course, men are more active. Men are often, especially traditionally, have been more the warrior types, and this warrior mentality has been running the world. And we need to return to a more balanced state of affairs where, as it was said also by Darla, who said, more women and diversity in government, absolutely. Or if not necessarily women, but, women are fine, but more of the feminine. We have to understand that one of the main things we're doing in relationships is we're each trying to evolve toward our opposite. One of the reasons why when we get in a relationship, we can tend to lose ourselves is because we tend to lose ourselves in the qualities of the opposite gender. When a man gets in a relationship, he's with a woman and he sees all of that natural softness and beauty and accommodation and yielding, and that thing that a man doesn't do very easily at all. Last thing, the hardest thing for me to do is what women just naturally do. Pretty much all women is to be sensitive and to be accommodating and to be naturally thinking of other people, and just that grace that women have that's naturally like this. So when we get in a relationship, we're trying to learn from the other person, but in so doing we can lose ourselves in those qualities. Just like a woman, when they fall in love or they are around a man, they're like around someone who naturally does things that they don't naturally do, and it evokes that part of their nature, because it's not like a woman doesn't have almost half of her nature as being masculine, and a man almost half of his nature is feminine. But again, as a matter of identity, we identify so much with the traits of our gender. So the woman gets around a man, and that 49% of herself, or whatever it is, that is trying to be more assertive and individual and self, very much identifying themselves as the source of everything, or, whatever. Men measure everything against their own identity. Men are like, this is me, this is my identity. I'm this person who is doing this. And everything you say, they're saying, yes, it is, no, it isn't, because this is me. Men are on a quest for their own individuality, identity, for example. And the feminine, as often embodied by women, are in many ways on a quest to be in flowing with everything and everyone and all of it flowing together, and trying to let go of that identity. It's like, oh, I'm everything, I'm everyone, and so they're like, wow, the man, he knows himself, he knows who he is. This is why simple things like confidence is so appealing in a man to a woman, because again, inherently, when confidence is that I know who I am, I'm confident. And again, with women, it's like it can show up as like not having as much confidence, because they're naturally trying to adapt to all situations. A man gets around that and they're like, wow, look at how she does this. It's like magic. Something we like, how does she do that? How is she able to do that all the time? Be so patient and be so, open and so non-egoistic, or whatever it is that men wind up doing a lot of. So anyway, the point of the matter is that the reason we tend to lose ourselves so much when we get around other people is we're trying to evolve toward our opposite. We're trying to evolve toward the qualities of that opposite gender. But we have to first know ourselves and know the powers of our own power, like the female, the power to be receptive. That's the power. So again, if a woman tries to identify with the power that the man has, it's not going to feel so good. The masculine power isn't necessarily the power that the woman is trying to enable in order to feel like herself. Hers is the power to be receptive, and the power to do that. That's the power to do that. If a man's trying to activate his power to be so sensitive first, then that's going to feel unempowering, because his first matter of identity is I'm the source, and I'm on purpose, and I have all of that masculine. Then after that's taken care of, then the power to be receptive. But this is why there's so much frustration, even again around the masculine and the feminine, and the way it dances in relationships. It's so subtle. So again, these concepts are also so important to understand before we even start really trying to then unravel what the two people are doing in partnership. But again, we see it now in the world so much where it's out of balance. It's so out of balance. With that recent, we saw disgusting that recent video of the cop on the neck of the black man was such a visceral reminder and expression of masculine energy out of control, sadistic, abusive, domineering, in fact, homicidal. With George Floyd handcuffed behind his back in the most vulnerable position and completely dominated by the cop just kind of leaning there and entitled. So again, we can really see what happens when these genders get out of balance. And so again, a lot of these lessons are really waking up now, because not just Venus being retrograde in Taurus, but we're also very close to this full moon and eclipse in Scorpio, where this polarity is coming into play. And our need for respect, mutual respect, which is Venus and Taurus energy, trying to take care of each other, trying to care for the world, trying to care for our family, trying to care for this human community that we have, that we're trying to build together, this future. All of these things are very Venus-like and very Taurus-like. And this is a great time to really study these things, to really understand these things, to really understand how respect, mutual respect, again, those qualities of masculine and feminine as sort of linchpins of where it all starts, as being key. And again, after that, we wind up then having to look at each of the planets. For example, the sun and moon are paired opposites, but then Mars and Venus are also paired opposites. Jupiter and Mercury are paired opposites. And the sun and Saturn is the opposite of both the sun and the moon. So each of the planets are going to bring a special quality to each part of the relationships. And by the way, Mars is also really important, because we need to have good boundaries, and it's Mars that enforces those boundaries much of the time. I'm going to take a little drink here. Excuse me. Amy Eager says, some take kindness as weakness. Yeah, that's true. And kindness is a masculine and feminine virtue. And this is one of those things where once we start to really look beyond a lot of misunderstandings, particularly with how far away we've gotten from understanding these things in a balanced and wise way, we'll see these things stop being so cartoonish. Like, masculine kindness is often a sort of protective grace and courage. Again, female is also courage, as well. The female kindness is often the selfless love and the empathy and the forgiveness part. The masculine is less around the forgiveness, more around the protection, but they both have a kindness, a warmth, and a selflessness and again, we all have it within us. Again, it's not just that men do masculine, women do feminine. We're a mixture of all of it. Women have just as much masculine energy, and men have just as much feminine energy. But we don't bond as a matter of identity. They don't feel the same within us because of our identity and because of our karma and because of the body that we're in. More of our identity is derived from certain traits as opposed to other traits. You want to think about that. It's very important because, for example, you might have a man who has a lot more, like his feminine energy and feminine planets are much stronger than his masculine planets. So he winds up being a lot more feminine in a lot of ways. And in many ways it serves him. But often when he gets in relationships where he's trying to be a man, this is where it can create the problem, because now he's going to be around a woman and his feminine energy is going to feel, it's not going to be a quality of where his identity feels like, yes, this is me, my masculine, this is me as a man. And he won't feel that as much because he'll be with a woman who probably has more masculine energy than him. And she's going to be waiting for him to be more masculine and always reflecting back that, why are you always waiting for me? Why don't you lead? Why don't you do this? It's et cetera, et cetera. And so these are the kinds of misdirections that happen when the masculine feminine is back and forth, when it's not connected. And again, I will tell you that I've even this year, I've probably done 45 relationship astrology readings. I do that all the time. All I do is, I look at these things. They're not just theories, because I hear people, and again, it's just typical because you hear me say these things. It's like, oh, and I think this, and I think this. Look, it's not like everything I say is absolute word of God or perfect or isn't beyond adjustment. But the things I'm saying are based on literally like 15 years of looking at maybe 150 relationships a year, asking the people. Readings are like, it's like a laboratory. It's also like, case studies. I'll say, so tell me what happened. Oh, and I'll say, and so when this would show up, you would feel this way, right? And he would feel that, and this would be like that, right? And like, oh, that's exactly what would happen. So again, it's a matter of identity that we wind up, the masculine and feminine as a matter of an individual. In a romantic relationship, we wind up trying to reaffirm that gender identity. So this is a big part of what happens in the romantic relationships, for sure, is how good we feel, how good a man feels as a man in that relationship, and how much the woman feels like the woman. Simple, but so deep and profound. And this is one of those things that is often, especially in this modern age, we're like, oh, we're much more sophisticated than all that now. We're not still like that now. So this is, a big part of what we're doing. One second. So anyway, this, I'm real glad to be teaching the, let me go here. And again, just to show the, you can see, again, if you want to look at it, I'll put this here again. I'll put the link again. You can see that, I'll scroll down the page. So it's not just, so it's Relationships 2020, and it's Saturday and Sunday, June 13 and 14. 4 p.m. Pacific. And again, it's a teleclass. And by the way, it's also, you can earn a certificate of merit and a badge from my school. Again, because it's so important, I want people to really know this and to be able to share it with others. You'll learn the importance of masculine and feminine, the most important synastry points, like I said, most important kutas, how to counsel people in all these situations, and also an outline of really everything that you should know, but the focus on the 80-20 factors, going most deeply into the most important factors, will be the essence of the weekend. So again, it's a very involved process to be reading all of those things, but you focus on 20% of the factors give 80% of the results. So again, you can see this infographic that I made, and again, go to that page that I put there and read it. You'll see importance of masculine and feminine energy. And again, You have the moon, you have the elements. Everything in the chart in astrology is masculine and feminine. Most important synastry points, most important kutas, how to counsel people. So again, you also get lifetime access to all of these teachings whenever you study with me. I'm given a deep discount due to the social distancing and all that. So it's only $47. Usually this would be $147. And it's also a full masterclass where I teach uninterrupted the whole time. And, you know, I've been doing it this way because I can just then give the information and not get sidetracked by questions that are, distracted and things that can just be time wasting. And again, so we have this, there's also a live Q&A. So it's not just over the weekend, but then there's also on June 20th, it's a free Q&A day to make sure that you get all your questions answered. So on the weekend course, I'm just teaching straight through. And there is some questions, especially some of my assistant teachers are there answering some questions in real time. And there's also a forum where you can ask questions. But then most of the questions are saved for the free Q&A day to make sure that you get your questions answered. And so there you have it. And again, we have here, let me just, okay. So again, I wanted to talk about this in context, of course, teaching this class as we, as we're in these very transformative times. Venus is retrograde, it's in Taurus, we're near this full moon. We're seeing such a polarity and a polarizing around not just masculine, feminine energies, but just learning how to deal with each other, learning how to treat each other. And we're seeing that, humanity is at a very precarious point now. We're at a point where domination structures have been in place for so long, masculine over feminine in social ways. By the way, I also just want to say something, and I know a lot of people don't like to hear this, but there are other ways where men are also marginalized in a lot of ways. If you don't know it, it is. Certain legal ways where men don't have the same kind of rights in courts, other things that, there's a whole thing, and I'm not an advocate of all this because I'm not a big advocate of any kind of formal movements, but the men's rights movement and whatnot has some legitimacy. I will tell you one thing, if you want to understand one thing about some men, if you want to understand this, I don't know. One thing you should understand is or I should say most men in this culture and in Judeo-Christian cultures who are either Jewish or white, like myself, have been circumcised. You know what circumcision is? It's gender mutilation. I'm sure I didn't get to choose when I was, however old I was, to be circumcised. That's a very nice euphemism for what it is. Look up the traumatic effects of circumcision that they're now looking at. Pretty horrific thing that a lot of, men now, but they were little boys. We talk about female gender mutilation, which is, of course, horrific. Of course, that's removing a clitoris, which is a totally different thing. But there's all kinds of stuff that we've done that are monstrous to both genders, of course, in the business sense and in the political sense, and in the access to things like the access to power and money. Women have been completely mistreated in this regard. So have, again, blacks and all minorities. And we're at a place in our evolution where we can't keep doing this. We can't keep doing this. And you're seeing these marches all around the world now, even in New Zealand and in England, for Black rights, Black Lives Matter. And we're seeing in stark contrast Jill says, I totally agree, Sam. I have sons. We're seeing in stark contrast between toxic masculinity, particularly with the President of the United States and those surrounding him. Toxic white masculinity. And the response of those who just want to be heard. They just want to be able to breathe. You know, this message, I can't breathe, is like on many levels. We can't breathe. Get off our neck. Get your knee off our neck. Don't know what to say about it. It's horrible. And we all see it. We all know it. Well, not all of us. But I think a much larger percentage than it might seem. I think it's a smaller and smaller number all the time. But unfortunately, those happen to be the ones in power. And by the way, I know it's all terrible as far as genital mutilation. It's all terrible. I'm just bringing it up, though. Of course, I know it's all terrible. Absolutely, and thank you for saying that. But what I'm saying is that all of these kinds of things, we've been horrible to everyone on so many different levels. And right now is a time, especially with all this Taurus energy, with Venus in Taurus, where it's going to be until August. We still got a couple months of Venus going through Taurus. And now is a time to really learn and pay attention and study relationships as the expression of respect more than anything, as the area of life where we learn respect, where we learn to respect each other in all its ways, in all its forms. The reason romantic relationships are the most concentrated version of it, or that's where we learn it the most, is because it's where we're the most triggered, and it's where we put the most on the line. It's where our desires are the highest, and we have the most at risk. But it's all relationships, like I said at the beginning. So anyway, I hope this has been helpful, and I hope that people who are interested would want to study, would want to learn this. Again, and it's not just learning how to do the readings. Again, frankly, out of the 150 people that might take the class, maybe 5 of them will wind up doing readings. And I know this, but the reason people study astrology is not just because they're going to do a lot of readings. I mean, it's my hope that people do take it. That's why I'm giving out certificates and certifications. It's because you need to know these things just for yourself first. We can't teach any of it, or we can't practice it or help others with it until we understand it. The biggest problem is most people don't understand these things first. They don't understand how these things were thought about in India, in the Dharmic faiths. They don't understand how these things work in themselves. They just don't understand the dynamics. So the first reason to study it is to learn it for yourself so that you know it, which is just going to improve your own life. And again, most people are so unaware of what they're doing in relationships. We're like totally unconscious. Almost everyone is like, when do you see my relationships? What's going to be the next thing? When am I going to get my soulmate? When am I going to get this? When is the magic person going to show up? The one magic person that I can get along with. Will I ever meet them? And instead of trying to understand what we're doing and who we are first. That's the first thing. And it's usually the part that it's not usually the part people don't want to do. Actually, when I start doing relationship astrology readings, I put most of the emphasis on that. Here's the thing you're doing. Here's the thing that all of your partners have in common. And that's you and all of your tendencies. And so let's talk about that. And then we'll talk about that very deeply. And this is the most important part in any relationship astrology reading that I do, that they're the most thankful for. Usually after I talk about all that stuff, the partner that they were so concerned about and the next soulmate that might come into their life starts to just recede. They're not even interested in hearing that so much anymore, because they now realize something like, oh, you're right. Is what I'm doing. Okay, great. I understand that. You're so right. And then we get into when maybe something else might happen. But the perspective that comes first from you learning about yourself, hello, it's like, oh, I'm a great partner as long as I don't have to change anything, do anything. I'm a great, I deserve so much. And as long as everybody else adapts to me, you know me, I like to laugh about these things. But yeah, we're so ready to like declare how great we are. As long as we don't ever have to do anything, we're great. So again, these are just some of the most important stuff that people learn when they study relationship astrology. It's first about yourself. And again, I don't even just mean your chart, but I mean even just the tendencies, even just how, again, what Jupiter has to do with your relationships in general. I don't just mean you as an individual. I mean in general. What does Jupiter bring to partnerships? What does Saturn bring? Mars, Mercury, what do they even bring? And then you look and say, oh yeah, and for me, it's like this. This is why I'm always blah, blah, blah in a relationship. So really focusing on that part and your own nature as a divine being, how that divine being is in relationships with others on many levels. And then what happens when that starts to mix with others? What happens when those buttons start getting pushed? And what are the most important ones to really see? Again, remember, it's the 80-20. I'm going to be concentrating on the real 20% that brings like the 80% of the results. And then the kutas as well, the nakshatra kutas, and the most important ones to focus on. So anyway, I hope this was helpful. And looks like we had, I've been scanning, you know, I often scan the comments and try to stay up on it and see what people are saying. And so I appreciate that people have been participating. And I'll post this link one more time. One more little commercial there. You're welcome, Amy. Absolutely. Shiva Kami, nice to see you here as well. Jill, she's been here. Michelle, Mondragon. Dorian, is there a link I'm missing to pay for a conversation with you? Yes, there is. There's also a contrast with a non-toxic, heartbroken dedication to protect and serve police officers that demonstrate real masculinity that are against the dominate them all mentality. Absolutely. Thank you very much for saying that. You're right. The thing we're seeing right now, more than ever, I'm glad I went back and looked at this, because you're absolutely right. Far and above, especially with the social unrest that we've been seeing. Far and above the response we've seen is the heartbroken cops who I would say 95% of them are good. I don't know what the number is, but they hate this kind of crap, the bad ones, more than you do. They're out there trying to do their best. You know, they don't make a lot of money. And of course you get bad ones, but you get bad ones in every profession. You get bad astrologers. You get bad everything. But the problem is that with something like law enforcement, it's especially problematic because they're armed. But absolutely the entire outpouring and response has been nothing but empathy and compassion. And I wouldn't say nothing, but at least with the officers, you see a lot more of that. And so what we hope, and what I hope happens, what we all hope happens, is that something occurs with the leaders that can actually make laws and get these laws through. There needs to be absolute standards for police officer training. It needs to be at a federal level. There needs to be mandatory sentences. They need to handle bad cops just like they handle bad criminals. It needs to be unhooked from the thin blue wall, or whatever it's called. You know, all of that stuff needs to happen. But it's absolutely true that most of the cops you see kneeling and sympathizing and empathizing, I would say my feeling is it's probably way more, if not, 80, 90% or more, are completely heartbroken over seeing one of their own do that. Just as angry as it gets in your job, like if you're a yoga teacher or astrologer or whatever, and you see it misused. It's infuriating. Imagine what they think, because now all of them have this stain on them. Now they're all dirtied up by it. So let's keep positive thoughts with that. I've seen so much good that's come out, at least as far as, the empathy around the world has been encouraging. And again, we're very near this lunar eclipse in Scorpio. But again, we have to remember it's the Taurus cycle. If you didn't see it, go watch my full moon in Scorpio, my Scorpio eclipse video, because I talked about it in that context of it's happening within the Taurus cycle. And this Taurus cycle is about respect, holding each other, caring for each other, caring for the world, having stable, loving interactions with each other, with nature, with compassion. So may we all keep that promise, and may you all have a great evening. Thank you for coming.